community.
So maybe I'll just the point you said, which is also that actually, as already pointed out, and it was evident in a lot of the quotes by migrant workers, this doesn't actually happen in a lot of other countries. So it's not right for people to say, you should be used to this because it happens like in our country, because it doesn't. You know, I've had Chinese migrant workers who come here and come to the airport and they're so shocked when they're told to get to the back of the lorry, because they're like, this doesn't even happen back where I live. You know, so what more here in a country where I arrive and I'm told it's so advanced, and this is how I'm transported to my dormitory. So it's not true that this happens in a lot of other countries, because it doesn't. It's been outlawed in many countries. Secondly, I think Singapore needs to stop this inconsistent application of, oh, we want Swiss standards of something when it suits us, but in other times, in other things, when it comes to labor rights, when it comes to migrant worker rights, we just compare ourselves to countries that are doing worse. You can't do that, right? So if you want to be a leader, you want to be excellent, you should be excellent and strive to be excellent in everything, not just in some things that you want. And then when it comes to rights, we can compare ourselves to countries that are doing much worse. And in some cases, they are also not, right? The government is actually the one who is the biggest, I believe, client for construction projects. A lot of projects are actually public sector projects, right? And we as taxpayers are paying for these projects. You know, and as a taxpayer and a consumer, I demand that they do better. You know, and the government actually collects billions of dollars in foreign worker levies. Every employer who hires a foreign worker on a work permit pays the government hundreds of dollars every month, right? In 2011, the government collected $2.5 billion in levies. It goes into a consolidated fund. That was in 2011. We're now in 2022. We now have 849,700 work permit holders. You multiply that by the levies that are collected per work permit holder, you have billions of dollars in a consolidated fund. What does it fund? We don't have the exact breakdown, but why can't some of that go into developing a system for transporting workers safely? What's the excuse? As I said, no morally defensible reason, right? So what's the excuse? If you never put your mind, and forget all this crap about seatbelts on the back of lorries, okay? It is not safe. You cannot make something that's inherently unsafe safe. It's like saying I'm a little bit pregnant. You cannot do that, okay? Not safe means not safe. And it obscures, it distracts us, you know. We go around thinking, how can we make this safe? I'm going to devise a competition. You tell me how to make this safe, I give you some money. No, we should direct resources in thinking how to solve this problem in the long term. And if we never direct ourselves to the goal of making transport safe, then we will never get there, because we've never set that as a policy goal. And we are not doing that, right? If we don't set a deadline, if we don't say we're going to put resources to achieving it in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, we will never get there. Okay, and we have the money, and we are told we have the administrative efficiency and the smart, that's why we're paying so much money, right? So we should set that goal, and then we will get there.
I think the previous panelists have covered it quite well, but what I will say is that, you know, even before we start looking at alternatives, when we look at what is existing, I think we should start by just doing away with laws that are discriminatory and just perpetuate unsafe practices. That should really be our starting point, you know, which can be done quite easily. Because right now what's happening is that you have, for example, when I was reading up for today's panel, I was coming across all these startups and all these private sector companies that were, you know, putting in place alternatives, like, you know, coming up with apps so that, you know, employers can tap in on whoever has a supply of buses and vans to transport their migrant workers, all of which are extremely well-intentioned, but it is really a band-aid solution to something that is extremely systemic and which affects hundreds of thousands of migrant workers. So, you know, we should start by actually looking at what it is that is causing all these, causing these practices to happen, and just ask ourselves, you know, as a society, are we ready to do away with these kinds of laws to begin with? And the other point that I just wish to make is that, you know, I think one of the other panelists said that, yeah, you know, when we when they come to Singapore and the reaction they get when they sort of speak up about these kinds of unsafe transport conditions is that, okay, you're not happy, you can go back to your home country. And this is something that is very, migrant workers in Singapore, a lot of them do not speak up because they are afraid they will lose their rights holder, they will lose their job. Because it is extremely easy for a migrant worker to be unilaterally terminated and repatriated back to their home countries if they raise any kind of safety concerns or if they are raising any kind of unhappiness about their living and working conditions. And this is not just unique to the transport issue. This permeates almost every aspect of the migrant workers' lives, whether it is their where they sleep, their food conditions, workplace safety. A big part of the workplace safety conversations that happen nowadays do not take into consideration the fact that migrant workers do not have job security. And this is the same also for the transport issue, because if they reject the mode of transportation that their employers impose on them, that they run the risk of simply being repatriated and sent back home. And as was pointed out, a lot of them come here with tens of thousands of dollars of debt. So, of course, they would do whatever they can to secure their jobs, to include accepting these very, very unsafe transport and working conditions. So we need to do better, because it is the system that forces them really to kind of put themselves in these unsafe situations, and their fathers, their brothers, their sons, and their families back home that they want to provide for. So obviously this should not be situations that they should be into. Yeah. And I'd just like to address one more point, which is that yes, we shouldn't be saying it's not a race to the bottom. Just because other countries have certain practices doesn't mean that we can and should do them as well. And as a matter of fact, other countries where there are high migrant worker populations, such as Bahrain and Hong Kong, have in fact outlaw practices of transporting migrant workers on the backs of goods lorries. And I think there is some, I think in Parliament it was said that the countries like Canada and the US are allowing these practices, but it's a little bit more nuanced than that, because these countries are divided into states and provinces, and a lot of these states and provinces have actually outlawed this practice as well. So while it may be there in some parts of the US and Canada, it is not countrywide. And Singapore is an extremely small country, so we really shouldn't, and we don't have this concept of states and federal provinces and all that. We are just simply one country. And with the sheer number of migrant workers that we have, I think it is just like Stephanie said, the morally right thing to do, to ask ourselves whether we are still okay with allowing this to happen. When we should have the will to make rather easy changes as well. Yeah.
Thanks for very positive solutions for this. And talking about the people here, many of whom are domestic workers, many are Singaporeans here. What could people like them, myself, we all do as individuals perhaps to raise more awareness of the issue? I mean, when we have traffic violations, many of us take pictures of the car number and report it to MPA, right? So is there something like that we can do? Is there something we can write to our procurement managers in our offices that if you are looking for ESG ratings, you better look at this part as well? Is there something that people on the street can do in Singapore if they are really concerned about this? Anyone would like to take? Chairman, Stephanie or Jen?
Actually, I know someone who has tried to report violation, but then I think when you reported it, the response you got back is that we will not tell you of the outcome. So you can report, but you'll never know if the authorities have or have not taken action. Unless we do a mass spamming exercise, and every day you just take photos and then you just keep reporting, and then you just keep harassing them, you just keep checking to see if something happens, right? But if there's no transparency in the reporting process, it's also very hard to figure out if your reports go anywhere. And also I think this situation is a bit different in that it's quite a systemic issue. There's very limited things individuals can do. Although I guess it will apply public pressure to some degree if we do keep pointing out that there is a lot of public disapproval. So the taking of the photos, the social media sharing, the outpouring of our, I guess collective sort of objection to this practice is still important. But ultimately to move the levers, it will take, I think, people in more powerful positions. Right now you have, I think, business lobbies, which are very powerful, right? Like construction associations, SCAL, who are quite opposed to it. So I think we need to also try to get more construction companies and big players within the industry to also come on board. It's going to be quite difficult also because it's split, right? You've got the big construction companies who are doing the right thing, but that's also because they have the most resources, versus the small, medium companies who don't have the financial resources and also get penalized by the main contractors if they don't deliver on time. So we need to deal with these structural dysfunction within the whole construction industry and deal with some of the practical issues. But the practical issues and the cost, I think, needs to come from the state, not from individuals, because the state has the resources to do that. What we can do as individuals is only to just keep saying that we're not happy, and hopefully the threat of voting them out will do something, but this is also not one of those issues that generally rallies people at election time, right?
Yeah, I think I echo a lot of what Stephanie says. I think this is something that just needs constant visibility. So that there is enough political will for there to be change. So the government has to be the one to set the standards on this and make the change from a top-down approach.
Particularly, this is the year where we have had one of the most number of workplace accidents. So maybe this is the year where many of these could be acted upon. On the other hand, you have high inflation, which is used by companies often to talk about parallel costs and other things. So it's a tricky situation. Do you have anything you wanted to